Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. We're going to get into the Sabaton history for night witches. I am extremely interested in the backstory for all of this. These types of groups are interesting to me in general. There was a former Army Ranger, I believe, who I was listening to an interview one time talk about fighting in the Middle East. And he said that there was a garrison of local women who basically every time they would get up and go fight, these women would be doing the same thing. They would be getting all of their guns and ammo and they would be getting ready to go out. And he was like, I can't explain how badly I wanted to marry one of those girls. And he was like, just everything about what they were doing and how they were doing it, he was like, I loved them so much. I loved them so much. And it was funny to me listening to it. But these types of groups are really interesting to me, especially in historical time periods where women weren't really allowed to fight in a lot of militaries, right? Which is why I was so intrigued at the idea that they were under Stalin. Because Stalin seems like the last person that would make exceptions for women fighting in the military, but I guess not. So I'm ready to get into it to hear what they have to say. So let's start it.
When you think of the soldiers fighting the Second World War, you probably think of men with machine guns.
However, in our song Night Witches, we're singing about badass women in bomber planes.
The large-scale
Those dive bombers are so freaking awesome. Those World War II dive bombers where they're literally flying like straight down at whatever they're going to drop their bomb at. Those are so crazy. I cannot imagine being in a plane. You're getting, flak shot all around you, and you're literally flying down into the flak. And then you get as close as you can, drop your bomb, and then pull up as hard as you can and try to get out of there without getting hit. Like, I imagine the biggest adrenaline rush that you could ever possibly have on the planet.
Industrialization of the Soviet Union in the late 1920s and 1930s opened up the country's economy for women in the workplace, and there was indeed no job for which a woman could not apply. Soviet propaganda encouraged them to join the workforce and steer the great machines of modernization, and the most fantastic symbol of that particular age of machines was the airplane. Many were inspired by Soviet heroine Marina Raskova, who set world records for long-distance flights, showing what pilots and planes from the Soviet Union could achieve. Newly emerging and quite popular flying clubs were also a chance for many women to escape the monotony, or the poverty, of their homes and learn how to become an aircraft mechanic or even a pilot themselves. Fast forward to the summer of 1941. Weeks after the German invasion, hundreds of thousands of Soviet women flocked to the colors, enlisting as nurses, signalers, or anti-aircraft gunners. The experienced female pilots of the flying club served as instructors and advisors for male recruits, but were not allowed themselves to fly into combat. The argument was that there were enough male pilots available. Marina Raskova, however, was determined to make a difference. With her influence in Moscow's political circles as a hero of the Soviet Union, she appealed to Stalin himself and got permission to create 3 all-female flying units: the 586 Fighter Regiment, the 587 Heavy Bomber Regiment, and the 588 Night Bomber Regiment. Raskova was a natural leader, and her call for volunteers was soon answered by hundreds of young women from all over the Soviet Union hoping to break into the ranks of elite female pilots. By mid-October, As confusion and chaos swept Moscow in the face of the rapid German advance, Raskova had set up her training camp at the large aerodrome in the city of Engels on the Volga River. There, the women of the 3 regiments were to be trained with planes, engines, armaments, and aeronautical studies and military drills. While the college-educated women were trained as navigators, those with factory or armory experience would work as mechanics. Naturally, all volunteers wanted to become famous fighter pilots themselves, but only the most talented and experienced pilots were accepted into the fighter regiment. They needed lightning-quick reactions and the ability to remain calm in battle. The professional pilots with many hours of experience were put into the heavy bomber regiment, led by Raskova herself. Those with less experience were put into the night bomber regiment, but those women may have needed the greatest courage of them all.
Pushing on and on, the flames are going strong. Rebels number one. Some were down below, they're looking for the foe. Others on the run. You can hide, you can move, just a fight that attacks their roots. In the dark, silent through the night, the witches on the fight. Never miss the mark.
The night bombers were to fly the Polikarpov U.
Golly, look at that plane. This is World War II. That is incredible. The fact that they were using those as bombers in World War II is crazy. Crazy to me. Now, they had like more technologically advanced heavy bombers, right? I'm almost positive they did. Did they not have enough? So this was like they had more pilots than they had newer heavy bombers, and so they just got whatever planes they could. Is that what this was? But golly, can you imagine going up and flying that, getting into a dogfight in the air, or going on a bombing run, especially because World War II bombers are extremely vulnerable, right? Like, they are extremely vulnerable. This is not the type of bombers that we have today. This is an extremely vulnerable position to be in, and especially in a plane like this, that I can't imagine is going anywhere near the speed of what other countries' modern planes are going. And I can't imagine that it is more durable or as durable as any of those more modern planes. I mean, that thing looks like if the wind got a little bit too choppy, you'd be in big trouble. Like, it looks like that thing could fall apart real quick.
U-2, a flimsy biplane compared to then modern dive bombers.
Yeah.
It had been designed and manufactured since the late 1920s and was used most often as a training plane. It had 2 cockpits, one for the student and one for the instructor. It was a small and slow aircraft made from lightweight plywood and percale, which was finely woven fabric made out of cotton. It was cheap to manufacture, unimpressive and outdated, but nonetheless a reliable workhorse for transporting the wounded, dropping supplies, or reconnaissance flights. The Soviets nicknamed it the crop duster or the duck, while to the Germans it was to be known as the sewing machine or the plywood Russ, since it was totally defenseless and too slow to outrun any of the German fighter planes. It could only operate in the safety of night. In fact, though, even small arms fire could bring it down fairly easily.
Wow.
But the overall situation was so bleak that even those little planes became symbols of hope and resistance. Over time, the women began to appreciate the simplicity of the crop duster, especially since the women of the heavy bomber regiment had to fly the Su-2, which was nicknamed the bitch because of how difficult it was to master. But
okay, so that is the case. They do have different planes that they're using as heavy bombers.
despite Soviet theoretical ideology of equality between the sexes, Russian machismo was pretty merciless, wearing boots, tunics, and greatcoats way too large for them since they were designed for men. The women were constantly mocked and teased by their male counterparts for their lack of femininity. But this only hardened their determination, since to them, a soldier was a soldier. Raskova ordered the women to crop their hair, and the battalion's commissar forbade anything she saw as girl talk and prohibited any sort of flirtatious behavior. By late May 1942, they were finally equipped with enough U-2 aircraft to prepare for combat. By summer, they left the aerodrome for the Southwestern Front to meet the German advance on Stalingrad and the Caucasus. As Axis forces were advancing on Rostov, Raskova's night bombers hit the German ammunition and fuel dumps, the vehicles, and the ground troops. Now,
What I'm wondering is, so these are regular bombers, right? They're being used as regular bombers. How the hell did they put bombs on those things? I'm trying to think of like where they would go. I mean, geez, how much weight can those things even carry, those planes? They would have to have been small bombs, right? I mean, they have to be small bombs. I don't know, we'll see.
it was the navigator's job to find the target and close in on enemy lines. Then the pilot would turn off the engine and silently glide through the night. The first planes would throw down flares to illuminate the targets, and the loads would be dropped. Then they would turn on their engines and escape before the Germans could fight back.
That is one of the most badass things I've ever heard of. Seriously. They killed the engine, it's dead silent, then immediately, I mean, think about if you're on the ground watching this, or you're on the ground and this is happening to you. Nothing's going on, you hear nothing, then all of a sudden there's flares all over the place, and bombs start dropping from planes, or you guess from planes, that there's no sound. So they're literally, it's like bombs are just falling out of the sky. And then once the bombs have dropped everywhere, then you hear planes kick on, and by that time they're leaving, they're gone. Like, what a badass way to do that. Like, that is so cool.
The U-2s were converted to bombers by simple, at first improvised attachments. A bomb load of up to 300 kilos was slung under the wings. Okay, this was not enough to inflict a lot of damage, but that wasn't the main purpose of the night bombers. They were to constantly harass the enemy, to deprive them of sleep, and wear them down, to grant them no rest periods. And for that, the Germans hated them. After learning that the night bombers were usually piloted by women, they would give them their famous nickname, the Nachthexen, the Night Witches. Every morning, the women came back with red faces and bloodshot eyes. They rebuilt their lives around their nocturnal life, having dinner in the morning and going straight to bed. They were constantly tired and hungry, but they were sure proud of showing the Soviet Union that women could fly as well as any man. And with every successful mission, they earned more respect from the male pilots and officers. But that would not protect them from the constant danger they faced. They had no parachutes, since Soviet high command figured that in case of engine failure, the planes could simply glide back to Earth.
Okay, yes, that is the theory with gliders in general. But first of all, these are different in that, it's an actual plane. It's not a glider, it's a plane. So that makes it, combustible anyway. But the whole theory to me is kind of crazy. Because if you are getting shot down, the whole thing is you're not going to glide to the ground, right? You're either going to your plane's going to get ripped apart and you're going to go straight down, or it's going to, the whole thing's going to catch on fire. Like, it's going to do what a plane's going to do. There's a lot of this. The reason why I'm kind of working through this thought process is because there's a lot of this. It's not just the Soviet Union. There's a lot of this thought process during World War II of kind of what's needed for safety in airplanes for these pilots. And the idea is for the lightweight planes and for the gliders and stuff like that, that you can more safely kind of make landings in distress situations. If anything, I think it's the opposite. I think you're less likely in a lightweight plane or a glider to be able to, make safety or make a safe landing whenever you're in a distress situation, because they're not made to withstand anything. So if you get in a real tight spot, you're probably gonna die. I mean, that's the reality of it. So that thought process seems backwards to me. Like, it seems like the theory is polar opposite to what it should be.
Earth. This totally disregarded the fact that the percale cotton fabric and plywood frame burned like crazy.
Sure.
And if that ever happened, it was likely that both pilot and navigator burned to death. But to Soviet high command, that was still preferable to being captured alive by the Germans. In fact, those who were shot down or crashed behind enemy lines were expected to fight to the death, as capture was dishonorable to any Soviet soldier and would leave a stigma for the rest of their lives.
God, this is more specific to the Soviet Union, and they did this constantly in this time period. In fact, there are multiple soldiers who, once they surrendered, if they got back to the Soviet Union, they would kill them there. The whole thought process is, if the Soviet Union basically takes on war at this time period of, the nature of war is death, and that is acceptable to them. Like, that is the acceptable outcome. And so the thought process, when you expound on that, kind of outwards, is it's okay if you die. In fact, chances are, if you fight for a long time, you are going to die. But it is so dishonorable or terrible or whatever to retreat, to surrender, anything that would show weakness, that it's unacceptable. Your duty, your job, your patriotism to the state is to, if you are in a tight situation, you are to die for the Soviet Union. It seems kind of wild, but that is the thought process.
Even pilots who were shot down behind the lines but hid and made it safely back to their own lines were interrogated and often condemned to death by the commissars.
God.
On January 4th, 1943, Roskova died in an accident on her way to the Stalingrad front. But the 588 was determined to live by her ideals. And as one pilot wrote, it was a time for bombing and bombing.
Canvas wings of death, prepare to meet your fate. Night bomber regiment, 588.
The Soviet counterattack prompted the hasty withdrawal of the Germans from the Caucasus and gave the Night Witches more than enough opportunities to harass and attack the retreating troops. From the steppes near Stalingrad to the high mountains of the Caucasus, the praise for the Night Witches grew. The freezing winter nights through which they flew at high altitudes with open cockpits did not discourage the women from fulfilling their missions. In fact, only once were they forced to remain grounded for a time. On the night of July 31st, 1943, during the German counteroffensive on the Taman Peninsula in Novorossiysk, the Night Witches approached the German positions and noticed that the anti-aircraft batteries were strangely silent. Suddenly, flares lit up the sky. It was a German night fighter attack, and in moments, U-2 planes were falling out of the skies, burning to the ground. The survivors broke off, scattering back into the darkness. Such high casualties in one night were a shock to the regiment, but one that didn't last long. The war that eventually turned against the German invaders brought the witches further to the west, to the Kuban, to the Krim, to Belarus, to Poland, and eventually Germany itself. Sometimes they made up to a dozen sorties a night, with only a few minutes of breaks in between. There are many stories of those young women who came from many different backgrounds and who did share their own personal tales of heroism, tragedy, and idealism. We were young and fearless. The fear came later, one of the survivors would recall. Heroic achievements and accomplishments led to more heroes of the Soviet Union than any other Soviet bomber regiment, 23 by the end of the war, with usually at least 800 sorties made. After the war, and after the regiment was disbanded, their commissar, Yevdokia Rachkevich, took it upon herself to personally search for the crash sites of every last one of her lost flyers to provide an accurate history of the regiment and the women that served and fought with it.
What a hell of a group. Man, what a crazy story and what a hell of a group.
Okay, badass women in bomber planes. That
Yes.
was a really good description, right? So how did you guys decide to choose this?
Actually, when we started doing research for heroes, this was one of the first that came up for us. Yeah. That's been in our what do you call it? Secret Sabaton archive for a while.
All right.
And we just thought it was a perfect way to open the album as well.
Yeah.
We have a tradition of doing something surprising for the first song, and I think that massive opening was a perfect way to start off the album.
Yeah, and then the tempo change into the
Oh
chorus.
yeah, sorry, you're right. Yeah, and we did something different there also with the chorus being half beat compared to the rest of the song, and which is something I really hate.
But if you hate it, why did you allow it to happen in this instance?
It's the only time I actually thought it worked.
Yeah?
We wanted that.
Whose suggestion was it? Who said, "Hey, come on, let's do this"? And you said,
Oh, I did that to myself.
"Oh, okay."
So- But no, I remember so clearly when we were doing the PR for this album. It's a couple of years ago now, but I was doing an interview and I was in the final stages of doing something else. I was in the studio. Interviewer was a bit nervous, I
Okay.
should say, and not used to doing interviews. And we had I think a regular 30-minute interview. I was on the phone. He asked me to tell something. Oh, you have a lot of stories. Could you tell me something from the album,
Okay.
story-wise? And I started, I can make an example out of the first song. And I started telling the story of the Night Witches.
Okay.
And I got a little bit carried away, because I was proud of the song and the story. So I, got carried away. And I probably spoke for about 8 minutes about only that song and the story about it. When I was finished, it got silent, and then I hear, okay, and the next song?
Oh man. Oh gosh. Oh, that's brilliant. So, now, what was the reception for Night Witches? Was this because this is not something that's familiar to people?
No. The story in itself is fantastic, no matter if it would have been men or women.
Yeah.
The fact that it is women, it's a extra nice bonus, I think.
Yeah.
And
It's very Soviet Union too.
yes, and
Yes.
it's still a part of our live set, very popular with the fans and us as well. I think we have some of the coolest pyro and video stuff going on that song as well.
Absolutely.
So I actually really enjoy playing that because we all I guess go off stage as the live intro for that song starts, and I sing the intro off stage, and I just get running in on the first boom of the verse.
But I have a very important question that I'm pretty certain everybody, not only everybody who watches Sabaton history, but everybody who's ever seen Sabaton or listened to Sabaton wants to know. Now, Night Witches, right? They to avoid any outward appearances of too much femininity and stuff because of problems with the male soldiers and stuff. They all cut their hair really short. They all crop their hair, right? One, do you think any of them had your hairstyle?
I certainly hope not.
And two, do we have any pictures of you when you were a kid with the same? Did you have the same
I was born like this.
All right, Joachim. Well, thank you very much for this today.
Thank you very much.
I always love talking to you about these songs. All right. Well, we'll see you next time
Thank you all.
on Sabaton History.
Okay, so that was the Sabaton history for Night Witches. that is a really, really great story. I loved the song. I loved the background. The whole thing is awesome. And talking about, whether it would be cool whether it was men or women, it would have been cool whether it was men or women because of the way that it was done, the engines being cut off on the planes and the silence before the bombing runs. But the time period and the fact that it's women really is a pretty badass. Like, it's pretty cool. So this was a really great one. In the comments below, I will put the Discord link. Obviously, the Discord has been growing a little bit. If you want to jump on there, the link will be below. If you want to help me keep building the channel, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time.